Right now, Professor Marandi, it feels like the calm before the storm, but the storm is indeed coming. Of course, we are talking about Iran's possible retaliation for Israel's multiple aggressions, escalating aggressions in the region, including the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. So maybe we can just begin, Professor Marandi, with what's going to happen. Can we expect a bigger, broader war here? I know that's what many people are afraid of, not just in the region, but worldwide. What is your assessment of the situation?
It's not impossible because the Iranian response will be uh, pretty severe. It will be more extensive and more punishing than what we saw in April. So it will really depend on the United States to yank on the leash of Netanyahu and his people so that we don't move towards greater escalation. If the regime, the Israeli regime, attacks Iran, then Iran will attack again because the objective of this uh, strike that will soon be carried out is to make sure that the Israeli regime regrets what it did and does not repeat aggression. Because obviously, the Iranian response in April did not lead to long term deterrence. The Israeli regime, was quiet for 2, 3 months and refrained from striking Iranian targets. But Netanyahu needs an escalation, and therefore he has carried out a new act of aggression, which for the Iranians is not just a violation of its territory. It's not just the murder of a senior uh, Palestinian official and a close friend of the Iranian leader, the president, and Ayatollah Khamenei and other um, important officials, and who's also a household name. But also, it was a strike against, it was an attack on Iran's honor and dignity because he was a guest in Iran, Martyr Haniyeh. So I think um, it's quite clear that if the Israelis or if the Israelis respond to Iran's retaliation, Iran will hit them again and again and again until the Israelis come to the recognition that they made a mistake.
Yes, yes, indeed. And given what you're saying is that Iran's response will be quite big, will be quite dramatic, and that this all depends on the United States and how they handle the situation. What do you make of some? I don't know if you've seen this around. There's a lot of talk about Iran, especially on social media, people who follow this conflict, people who have been following West Asia. And one of the criticisms I hear is that Iran is going too slow, that there was a lot of criticisms about Operation True Promise, maybe giving too many signals to the US and Israel about what was going to happen. What do you have to say about this? Because I've seen it, and you are in Iran, and maybe you can educate the audience best on how Iran exactly is navigating this storm that we are speaking of.
So, are you referring to the April Operation True Promise, or are you referring to right now?
I
The
think in
criticism.
sorry. Yes. I am referring to both. I think starting in April after Operation True Promise and into today, there's a lot of feelings among those who want to see decisive action. What do you have to say, I guess, about their assessment as compared to maybe the reality on the ground that you have been studying and witnessing in Iran?
Well, I understand those who are not happy with or completely happy with the Iranian response in April, the True Promise operation. But I have to also point out that the Iranians in that operation had a number of objectives. And the Iranians also believed that it was not just a response to the Israelis, but it was an opportunity to open certain doors for Iran. So until the Israeli regime struck the Iranian embassy, it was very difficult for the Iranians to contemplate striking the Israeli regime, even though they had murdered a number of Iranians in Syria during previous months and previous years, because they were, of course, targeted killings. But it is very difficult to convince neighboring countries that we're going to fire drones and missiles over you and strike Israel because they assassinated someone in Damascus or in some other part of Syria. So when the Israeli regime, carried out the strike on the embassy, the Iranians had an opportunity to strike the Israeli regime for the first time directly. And so they first went through the motions. They went to the UN Security Council. They took their complaint there. The US, France, and England, and Germany, apparently, if they were in the council at that time, they said, no, we will not condemn the Israeli regime. So the UN Security Council refrained from condemning the regime that carried out an airstrike on a diplomatic facility, killing 12 or 13, I'm not quite sure, I don't remember right now, but 12 or 13 people. So that strengthened Iran's hand and Iran's argument to strike at Israel, because Iran was saying, look, the UN Security Council is supporting the bombing of the Iranian embassy. Basically, that's what Western countries were doing. They refused to allow the Israeli regime to even be condemned. So Iran told its neighbor, Iraq, that we're going to fire missiles and drones at Israel. And it also informed the Jordanians. And if you recall, the Iranian acting foreign minister, the foreign minister at that time, he contacted the different governments in the Persian Gulf region and beyond, informing them that Iran is going to attack. So it would be very difficult for anyone to really make this a big issue because of what the Israeli regime did. Even though the Jordanians supported the Israelis and they were part of the coalition to stop the Iranian missiles and drones, but still it made it more difficult for them. It strengthened Iran's case in the eyes of the public in the region and beyond, and in the eyes of many governments. Now, even when Iran fired the drones and missiles, it had to inform the Iraqi government because you have civilian aircraft flying over the country. So it's not as if Iran could just fire away. And also, some people say, well, why did the Iranians announce that they were firing the drones? The drones would be on their way it would take 5 or 6 hours to get to Palestine. And therefore, the Israelis would find out very soon that those drones have been launched. The Americans have spy satellites and intelligence gathering means across the region. And so if Iran launched the drones and missiles quietly, the Israelis would have been informed by the Americans very rapidly. So the Iranians thought it would be an opportunity to spread fear in Palestine among these colonizers, these settlers who are doing what they're doing to the Palestinians. So they announced it so that they would have a number of hours of waiting before the drones got there. Now, one may say that, okay, well, all this aside, maybe the Iranians should have hit harder. But there is a lot of things were going on in the region and beyond. Iran did not want the focus to be taken away from Gaza, A. B, Iran did not want its friends and allies across the world to feel that maybe Iran is using this as an opportunity to bring about a regional war. The Chinese are concerned, the Iranian neighbors are concerned, countries across the global south don't want to see a global economic meltdown. Because if there is a regional war, then that's what's going to happen. If the Americans get involved, let's say, and strike Iran, then all those countries that host American bases in the Persian Gulf region, they will be hostile. All those oil and gas installations, they'll be gone. In Iraq, the Americans will be overrun. That will mean basically that the global economy will collapse. It will collapse in a way that it has never collapsed before. Not even the 1929 stock market meltdown and the subsequent depression would be anything like this. This would be much more severe. Iran doesn't want the world to blame Iran for it. It wants to make sure that the Israeli regime is seen as responsible. So the Iranian response was very calculated. They fired roughly 300 very old drones, which for Iran didn't cost anything, very little. They were first generation drones, very different from Iran's modern drones. I think the Russians would tell you the difference between new Iranian drones and old Iranian drones. And of course, some older Iranian missiles, and a few new Iranian missiles, newer missiles, which all of the new ones went right through the Iron Dome and hit their targets. So the older missiles were also used as decoys, but they're also, and the drones, they were all used to draw fire. And that's what happened. The Americans, they spent roughly, I think, $2.6 billion on missiles and other means to down Iranian missiles and drones. And the Israelis, from what I recall, spent something like $1.4 billion. And the Americans did the heavy lifting. They were the ones who really downed the drones and missiles. The Israelis weren't very capable. And they were forced to down them because although they were very old drones, but if they didn't down them, they would hit their targets. So they had to fire missiles that would cost maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes tens of thousands of dollars, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars to down a drone that costs like a couple of $1,000s. So it was very costly for the Americans and the Israelis, especially at a time when they need these defense capabilities in Ukraine. And there's a huge shortage of these missiles in Ukraine, as you know quite well. And your audience knows because I know you follow this. So it came both at a financial cost, but also it depleted their stocks for future conflict, in case of future conflict, which is now. Also, and most importantly, for Iran, it was an intelligence gathering operation. Because Iran was able to draw fire from all quarters, from the British, the French, I mean, everyone was a part of this, the regional countries, the American Air Base in Turkey, in Qatar and Bahrain, across the region, they were all working together to bring down these drones and to help the U.S. Air Force and others to find the drones and find the missiles and bring them down. So for Iran, they learned a great deal about U.S. capabilities and British, French, and Israeli capabilities all alongside one another, and the role that the different bases that the Americans have in Turkey and in the Persian Gulf, what role they play. So I'm not a technical person. I don't know the technicalities, so that's basically all I can say in this regard. But even more important than that was the fact that the Iranians actually carried out the attack. And so they normalized striking Israel from Iran. So from now on, this is nothing new. It can happen again and again and again. So I think that it was a deterrence. It was a significant deterrence. It was It was very costly for the Americans and the Israelis, as I pointed out. It was quite humiliating for them. The missiles that were supposed to get through and hit two bases, one in the Golan and the other in the south, they got through. And as I said, for 2-3 months, the Israelis refrained from attacking Iran. And during this period, Iran has been doing a lot through Syria. The Syrian government has helped a lot in getting whatever needs to be taken to Lebanon or to somewhere anywhere else to go through Syria. But obviously, with hindsight, that deterrence was not enough. And so this time around, the Iranians are going to have to hit harder. And one reason why Iran has to hit harder is the very fact that last time around, the deterrence wasn't enough. And the Europeans and the Americans refused to stop the Israelis from carrying out attacks. Not only do they, I mean, you've seen the footage. I've seen the footage of the rape. The systematic rape is going on in these different dungeons, in these camps. They're massacring women and children day and night. As we speak, people are being slaughtered. The Europeans and the Americans have no problem with that. They will support Israel until the last Palestinian. So obviously, until the last Palestinian is killed. So obviously, Iran cannot depend on sane European leaders or sane American leaders recognizing that this is dangerous. So they have to punish the Israeli regime. And now the Iranian logic for striking Israel harder is even stronger, because they're saying, look, 3 months ago, we hit them. We didn't hit them as hard as we could for the sake of peace and stability, but look what happened. So Iran's international partners, its regional partners, countries that are members of, BRICS, for example, many of them are key Iranian friends, if not allies, neighboring countries. They all have to be convinced by Iran that we're not the problem. It's the Israeli regime that's the problem. It's this genocidal regime that is raping men and women and slaughtering men, women, and children 24 hours a day. That's also bombing Lebanon and Syria and even the West Bank. They bombed the West Bank, and this regime is a rogue regime that's out of control. And the only way for us to be able to have peace and stability is to make it regret its attack. So it's not just about striking Israel. There are a lot of things involved, and also Iran has friends and allies. Iran has to, it's not the Americans and the Europeans. It's about the whole of the global South. It's about Iran's neighbors. So, and again, this time around, Iran also went to the UN Security Council, but it also called for a meeting of the foreign ministers of the Islamic states and Islamic countries. So all of these political activities were to strengthen Iran politically, so that if the Israeli regime does the stupid thing and attack Iran again and escalate further, because we have to keep in mind that we are already in a stage of escalation. When the Israeli regime bombs Beirut and bombs a civilian tower, a residential block, to kill one person, just to kill one person, they destroyed a residential block and murdered women and children. When they bomb Al Hodeidah and kill ordinary people at and civilian infrastructure, that's escalation. When they assassinate a senior international figure in Tehran in an official government guest house, a guest house where presidents stay in, prime ministers stay in, foreign ministers stay in, presidential messages are brought to Iran by special envoys. They stay at that guest house. When they strike a target like that, then that's all escalation. And therefore, Iran is not escalating, Iran is responding to that escalation. So if the Israeli regime strikes again after the Iranian strike, after Hezbollah strike, after the Yemen strike, after the resistance in Iraq strike, then the international community will know exactly where things stand, that this is the Israeli regime that's the problem. So it is not just, Iran cannot just, Iran could have struck Israel, the Israeli regime, hours after what happened, because Iran has underground drone and missile bases across the country, enormous bases across. They've been preparing themselves for potential American aggression for 20 to 30 years, ever since the war in Iraq. They've been preparing themselves. And that is exactly why the Americans are unable to destroy Yemen's missile and drone capabilities, because they too are underground. And the same is true in Lebanon, and the same is true in Gaza, and the same is true in Iraq and parts of Iraq and Syria as well, where the resistance stores their key equipment. So Iran could launch drones and missiles very, very rapidly. But there are lots of things to do, and there's also one final issue, and that is psychological warfare. Last time round, the Iranians wanted these, and I think I referred to this early on, but again, like last time, the Iranians want the Israelis to experience fear. They are raping people. They are openly raping people, and the majority of the Israeli public supports rape, as we saw through the Channel 12 poll, the Israeli Channel 12 poll that was published. The majority of Israelis support raping prisoners, and the overwhelming majority support the bombing of women and children and the massacre of Palestinians. And Israeli ministers have spoken about starving all over 2 million Palestinians in Gaza, and saying that that's the moral thing to do. So I don't think Iran sees it as a problem for Israelis to worry a bit for a few extra days about when and how the Iranians are going to respond.
Yes, yes, indeed. I was going to ask you actually to comment on the psychological warfare component, because we've seen the Americans, right? Antony Blinken just scrambling to predict when Iran is going to strike. We've seen videos of Israelis, fleeing en masse. We've seen, just so many media reports now all across the Western mainstream media. When will they attack? And now there's an effort to almost denigrate Iran, to say, oh, well, this waiting period must mean that Iran is more fearful of an attack than they've made it out to be so far. What do you have to say about that kind of reporting that we've been seeing?
Well, time will tell, but that's I think the best response that anyone can give. If the United States and the Europeans want to think that way, that's fine, but that's not going to change the reality. And I think the Americans and Europeans have to keep in mind that in the Red Sea, the Americans have been battling Ansarullah, the Yemeni armed forces, or what the West likes to call the Houthis, for almost 10 months now. The Ansarullah, Yemen, has been implementing a siege on Israeli ports because they say that we are implementing the Genocide Convention. And the Americans, in order to help the Israeli regime carry out genocide and the Holocaust in Gaza, and to enable them to do all the things that they're doing, like the systematic rape and the death as a result of rape and torture and all that, they have been fighting against Ansarullah in the Red Sea. Who has won? Ansarullah is the side that dictates what ships go through the Red Sea and what ships don't, and there's nothing that the Americans can do about it. So does anyone think for a moment that the Americans can defeat Iran in any conflict? No, the Americans will lose. The world will lose, but the Americans do not have the ability to defeat Iran. They cannot defeat Ansarullah. How are they going to defeat Iran? Iran is far stronger than any of its allies in the axis of resistance. In fact, the Israeli regime, which hasn't been able to capture Gaza after 10 months, and this is now being admitted by just a couple of days ago, apparently, CNN did a report on this, saying that Hamas and its allies have been able to keep their hold on the whole of the Gaza Strip, and the Israelis have failed. So if the Israeli regime has failed after after 10 months of genocide and slaughter in Gaza, which is a dot on the map, if you look at the world map, you can't even see it, then Israel is not really in a position to fight Hezbollah, let alone Iran. So I think it's very clear that the Israeli regime and its Western allies are not in a good place, especially as the United States is losing the war and NATO is losing the war in Ukraine. The Russians are making advances literally daily. And as tensions with China are always on the rise in the South China Sea and due to Taiwan. So the Americans are not in a position to go and mobilize their forces at a time when they're spread out across the world, and at a time when they're facing economic turmoil, and as we saw with the stock markets, and also with internal problems that the United States and European countries have. The British, for example, the race riots that we've seen, they're not a good sign, regardless of the nature of those riots. But the situation is not good in the United States and in Europe. They are not in a position to engage in any war with Iran and have any hope for success.
Thank you for tuning in to my latest video. I appreciate all of your support. This channel, however, needs your help. I am seeking to make this channel more sustainable in the long term and upgrade necessary equipment to ensure that this work continues onward and makes progress to give you all of the geopolitical analysis that you all deserve. For that reason, I'm asking you to become a member of my Patreon community at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong. You can find that link in the video description or in the pinned comment below. For whatever amount you choose to give, just know you are supporting independent media that you can't find anywhere else. Thank you so much, and I look forward to the next video.